Chapter 16, The Elmeth. Luna II continued circling Earth in its orbit, 180 degrees opposite that of the Moon. In addition to functioning as a Federation fortress, the former asteroid now also housed several thousand civilian refugees from colonies, most of whom had been mobilized to work for the various supply units or local military factories. Among them was Fra Bao, Amuro Ray's former next-door neighbor on Side 7. Although still in her teens, Fra was already in charge of 3 young children, war orphans Katz Hawin, Retz Ko Huan, and Kika Kikamoto, the oldest of whom was 9. Because the children had refused to enter the local orphanage and insisted on staying with Fra, the officials involved had reluctantly granted her custody. With the war still raging, with her new situation and the need to earn a living, she abandoned a dream of becoming a fashion designer and decided to pursue a mechanic's license. Aware of her plight, some friends with connections helped her obtain work at the local military vehicle maintenance plant. Life on Luna II was hard but by no means miserable. She was young and resilient enough to recover when overworked, and her 3 young charges loved her as if she were their own mother. "Fra, we brought you lunch." Kika's high-pitched young voice echoed through the maintenance area where Fra worked. Over a dozen mechanics, most graying at the temples, crawled out from under the vehicles they were working on to greet her. "Well," one worker said, "if it isn't little Kika again, we've been waiting for you, sweetie." "Hey, Kika," the foreman added, doffing his military helmet and wiping his brow. "What happened? You're 3 minutes early today." "Bravo works too hard for you guys," Kika retorted, sticking out her tongue. "She needs a break." Chuckling at her impudence, the workers in the plant gathered together, opened their lunch pails, and began eating. "Kika, where are Katz and Retz?" Fra asked. "They're coming. They're still playing Space Invaders." "Well, tell them to get here on the double. It's time to eat." "Roger Dodger," Kika said, happily running off to fetch the others. As Fra watched her little charge disappear, she realized how long the girl's pretty hair had become. She loved the S-blonde-eyed of it, and was even a little envious, but she also knew she should cut it soon. She reached into her purse and fished out a compact. It was military issue and utterly lacking in any aesthetic quality, but she nonetheless treasured it. In the little mirror, she saw grease smeared on her cheeks. She took out a handkerchief and, while wiping them clean, resolved to buy some lipstick with her next month's paycheck. In the Force, Waves often scorned women who wore lipstick or makeup, but Fra didn't care. She was in her late teens, and she had rights of her own. She would do it for Amuro. For Amuro. The moment the thought formed in her mind, tears welled in her eyes, and as she watched in the little compact mirror, they began rolling down her round cheeks. Amuro. She didn't care if he came back missing an arm or a leg, or even if he fell in love with another woman. She just wanted him to come back alive. The thought grew louder and louder in her mind. If only he would survive. In the future, he could make her cry or even make her angry, and she wouldn't mind. But if he died, there would be no future, only memories. And her last memory of him would be their brief exchange over a vid phone as he departed from Luna II. That was a possibility she couldn't bear to think of. Fra again resolved to buy her lipstick, to buy it for Amuro. She slowly closed the lid on her compact. Hey, I was just about to break the 3,000-point limit. Retz complained to Kika as the two of them ran over to Fra. Let's eat, they yelled. Hey, it's Retz's fault, Katz whined, nonetheless taking out a paper napkin and wiping the hands of the younger two. Noting Fra's face, Retz suddenly piped up. You've been crying, haven't you? Now why would I do that, silly? She answered, opening up the lunch rations the children had brought. Oh no, not hamburgers again, they all chimed. We're at war, Fra said, again in a scolding tone. Think of all the poor soldiers out, who'd love to eat something as nice as this. You really think Zeon's that clever, eh? Bright asked the pilots assembled on the Pegasus Taka Bridge. We've arrived at our rendezvous point ahead of schedule, so I say we ought to stay here till we can coordinate with the other fleets. The Corregidor Shoal Zone's an ideal place for us to hide. Well, The same's true for Zeon's ships, Amuro answered. Do you really think we can avoid being ambushed? Why would they ambush us now? We're the only squad in the area, and the Zeon warships coming out of Solomon now are ignoring us. The Principality wants to take on the entire armada, not just us. That's the way they think, and that means they don't want to waste a single ship on us. That's assuming a lot, Skipper, Lieutenant Commander McVeary said. The performance of the young mobile suit pilot seemed to have impressed the veteran fighter pilot mightily, for he rested his arm on Amuro's shoulder and continued. With all due respect for your own new type potential, I disagree with your analysis, and I'm inclined to agree with young Amuro Ray on this one. Personally, I think there are enemy ships waiting for us. You really think an ambush is possible? Bright said. You said it yourself, Skipper, Hayato interrupted, speaking with far more conviction than usual. We got here early. That'll bring the enemy out after us, especially the Red Comet. I bet he wouldn't pass up an opportunity like this. I think we ought to get through the Corregidor area as fast as possible, and then wait to coordinate our movements with the others. Bright finally caved in. All right. Looks like nobody has an absolute majority here, but you've convinced me. I'll buy your ambush idea. We'll go through the shoals, but on one condition. McVeary, I want you to agree to the lineup I've decided on. McVeary grinned sheepishly and turned and looked at Amuro quizzically. Amuro knew what was going on. The skipper's known us longer, sir, he said, and he's putting us out front. He's deferring to you in a way, sir. I'm sure you can understand. He knows you've already lost 4 of your men. I know, Mr. Amuro. Deferring has a polite ring to it, but what it all boils down to is that the lieutenant doesn't trust me and my men. Amuro laughed. Sir, don't you think you're being a little too sensitive? Hell yeah. But in the Tomahawk Squadron we have to be sensitive. We have to be on our toes at all times. I know what you're saying, sir, but I've gone up against the Elmeth once before, and I think it's better that I go up against it again. All right, McVeary said. In front of you, my fair-haired lad, I'll skip the bravado. He gave Amuro's rear end a light slap, turned, and walked over to where his men were standing on the bridge, the magnets on the soles of his boots making a pleasant clicking sound. Amuro shrugged his shoulders at McVeary, turned toward Bright in the captain's seat and saw Sayla behind him. She had been watching his interchange with McVeary and smiled. Next, Bright formally announced the lineup. Junior Grade Lieutenant Amuro Ray's G3, the gun cannons, and the GMs will lead the Pegasus. Lieutenant Commander McVeary's Tomahawks will assume positions to our stern, starboard, and port. The Cypress and the Graydon will follow, and the 4 VX-76 Bulls will form our rear guard. There was something about the way he handled himself that Amuro admired intensely. McVeary had a masculine, charismatic quality that made men want to follow him. It involved principles and ideals, individual goals and a plan to attain them, and it all seemed like a mysterious art to Amuro. The only excuse he could think of for himself was his youthful inexperience, and the more he thought about that, the more inferior he felt. At least, he secretly prided himself. Pretty blonde Sayla had finally introduced him into the ways of manhood. That he could congratulate himself on such a simple matter in itself revealed his immaturity, for although youth does mature quickly through direct experience, a further test is the way experience itself is interpreted, whether it is glorified or accepted as a natural part of growing up. In Amuro's belief that his relationship with Sayla had turned him into a more sophisticated adult, and in his growing belief that nearly anyone could easily evolve into a new type, he was still naive. To the other 4 pilots in his mobile suit unit, Amuro announced, Once we get through the Corregidor shoals, we'll be resupplied. We take off in an hour. I want everyone to go out there and do their duty. He tried to choose his words carefully, but noticed that Kai and Hayato had smirks on their faces. They weren't deliberately trying to insult him, but he didn't like what he saw. Dismissed, he barked, immediately remembering he should have first asked them if they had any questions. Kai Shaden, always the jokester, could not hold back a laugh. Hey, Amuro, you don't have to get so uppity just because you're our unit leader. We'll still respect you. Amuro ignored his friend's remark and turned on his heel. Why was he so tense? He wasn't experiencing a premonition, or it would have manifested itself in a far more distinct manner. If this was just a new way to deal with pre-combat stress and anxiety, it wasn't doing him any good at all. If Kai, Hayato, and the others weren't there, and if he hadn't been on duty, he would have liked to spend some time with Sayla, but that wasn't possible now. The Pegasus was on a maximum combat footing and plunging straight into the Corregidor Shoals. Along with the other mobile suit pilots, Amuro climbed into his suit and performed a final check of his cockpit instrumentation. Then the face of Sayla Moss appeared on his 3-inch communication monitor. G3, she announced first. Junior Grade Lieutenant Amuro Ray. Are you ready? All systems are go, he replied over his mic. Currently at launch point. That was all Sayla needed to hear, for her image immediately disappeared from his monitor. Faster than normal, it seemed. Was she deliberately ignoring him? Didn't women feel any special emotion at a time like this? He wondered. Then, in the next instant, he heard Petty Officer First Class Callahan Slay's high-pitched voice. G3, stand by for launch. Ready. 3, 2, 1. G3 now launching. The catapult mechanism beneath the Gundam's feet surged forward with a roar. He felt the G-force, and a second later, all man-made objects disappeared from view on his main screen, and he found himself looking at a vista of millions of stars in a jet-black universe. C-108. C. Over his receiver, Amuro heard the call signs of the other mobile suits behind him mixing with a rising level of static. The Gundam's autopilot system established the correct distance to precede the Pegasus, and the other suits fell into formation. Secondary combat speed, he called out. He fixed his gaze on his main screen. A huge boulder soared toward him and then vanished to his rear. They were in the Corregidor Shoal Zone. The Elmeth cockpit was roomier than that of Azaku, and Cusco rather enjoyed sitting in it, waiting. Her instrument panel glowed faintly in the darkness, and outside the only light she could see was that of the stars around her. With the sun out of sight, they seemed to be burning brighter than ever, densely matted in a world of black. She saw the faint red shadow of Char's Rickdom next to her appear to drift slightly. I wonder if he's noticed, she thought, but decided not to dwell on it. In the weightlessness of space, it seemed absurd to position anything perfectly. The universe would be a lot nicer place if men weren't so power-hungry, she muttered to herself. She hated it when Char and Chaliabol started talking so righteously about the Zabi family and their own plans. It made her want to throw a monkey wrench into their schemes. She smiled at the thought. Perhaps subconsciously, that was a reason she had taken a liking to Amuro Ray. It was not just because she had sensed new-type potential in him. She really had thought he was cute. As if triggered by an association, she suddenly sensed something. With her right foot, she gently pushed down on the activator pedal and aligned her Elmeth with Char's Rickdom. He seemed to have sensed something, too. Amid static, she could make out his fuzzy image on her communications monitor. 12 o'clock, Cusco, elevation 0. Understood, she replied curtly. She yanked back on the left and right steering levers, and the Elmeth rose steeply, bursting from its hiding place in the shoal zone. The 6 Rickdoms followed. Simultaneously, the Madagascar readied its cannon for attack. Cusco gradually accelerated her Elmeth, cursing the men around her. Politics, politics! They ought to think more about what it means to be a new type. Then she released the 12 remote-controlled bit units carried in the Elmeth's fuselage. As if on cue, beams began stabbing toward the Elmeth from in front of her. For a second, Char's Rickdom was highlighted by the glare. Cusco! His voice barked over her speaker. Concentrate on operating the bits. I'll cover you and the Elmeth. Thanks, she replied. She had registered the relative position of the bits in her mind, and they were already charging forth toward the enemy she had visualized. Bits were configured with either a mega-particle cannon or a nuclear warhead, and operated under a system of remote control that used brainwaves amplified and projected by the Psycommu interface. Since Minovsky particle interference had made radar-based guided weapons impractical, they were the only remote-controlled weaponry that worked effectively in space. As Zeon and Federation forces converged at high speed, all thought of Amuro Ray disappeared from Cusco's mind. The 12-bits headed for their targets, and their built-in video cameras recorded images that were amplified and projected by the Psycommu directly back to her brain, where they became an integral part of her vision. It wasn't hard to control the bits. Humans easily recognize and act on visual information from multiple sources simultaneously. Cusco Al merely demonstrated this ability on a more advanced level, controlling the bits through the Psycommu interface. There was a linear order to the visual information from each of the bit units, and her cerebrum merely had to reflexively differentiate and exert control over it. Then Cusco saw the Federation's Gundam model mobile suit. In the same instant, a suppressed thought barged into her consciousness. Was it really piloted by the young man she had found so attractive? By Amuro Ray? She had not really received any solid information to that effect, but she felt somehow certain it was he, and during her seconds of confusion, one of her bit units was destroyed. A light stabbed deep into her cerebrum, and she knew that the Gundam had taken a shot at her. She swore. She knew if she had to confront the Gundam directly, she was in trouble. Her survival instincts and the primeval fighting instincts that had qualified her for combat in the first place would automatically assert themselves over all other thoughts. She began to feel pure hatred for the Federation, for Zeon, for the war, for the male society that caused it. She was ready to fight. As Char watched, a rocket whooshed out of the Elmeth into the darkness, leaving a long trail from the blue-white cone of light billowing around its nozzle. It happened so abruptly that even he felt nervous. "Cusco!" he shouted into his microphone, pushing his red Rick-Dom to catch up to the Elmeth. "Don't rush yourself." As if her action were the trigger, Chalia Bull led the other suits forth, huge flares spewing from their skirted engine cowlings. Rick-Dom engines were said to be equivalent in power to those of a cruiser. And at the same time, the mobile suit unit's mothership, the Madagascar, sailed out from the shelter of a huge asteroid, firing both cannon and regular missiles in the anticipated direction of the enemy approach. The ship's huge Fife nuclear missiles, mounted both port and starboard, possessed such awesome destructive power that they had to be used before the opposing fleets of ships actually came into contact. Crewmen often claimed they could shake the whole universe, and when the first one launched, even the Madagascar seemed to shudder. In a blaze of light, the missile soared up past Char and his men toward the enemy. Amuro Ray intuitively sensed something coming straight for him. Is this an auxiliary remote unit or an incoming missile? He wondered. Suddenly his mind cleared, and he knew. Missile! Unlike the leaping, relentlessly advancing impression generated by an Elmeth's remote units, missiles normally created a linear pressure in his consciousness and were thus easier to deal with. But if this were a missile, it felt unlike anything he had ever before experienced. It seemed to possess far more power. He knew his comrades couldn't hear him, but he shouted out, "Kai, Hayato, leave this one to me." Then, lining up the sights on his beam rifle with the crosshairs on his main monitor, he shifted his aim 0.3 degree to the right. And in that instant, several bursts of light erupted around his Gundam. Kai and Hayato had destroyed a couple of the attacking remote units from the Elmeth for him. He gave silent thanks and knew they were giving him time to concentrate completely on the incoming missile. And then he knew it was a Fife. The first shot from his beam rifle hit home. The Fife exploded and mushroomed into a roiling inferno. The blast occurred in the middle of the two approaching fleets, but was still powerful enough to make the mobile suit units of both forces shudder. The light from the explosion was sighted by Federation and Zeon warships several combat zones removed. Furious, Amuro drove his Gundam forward toward the enemy at full speed, but as he did so, he saw the unique leaping light of several more Elmeth remote units bearing down on him from both sides. He wasn't in the mood to put up with any more attacks. He swung the Gundam fuselage left and right and fired 2 blasts from his beam rifle. Light from the exploding units streamed toward him, and he aimed the Gundam in a downward trajectory in their direction. With a shock, he instinctively realized that whoever was piloting the Elmeth this time was even faster than Lala Sun had been. He was awed by the way the attacking units slid toward him, and the way they timed the blasts of their mega-particle cannons. And he felt an intense mental pressure when they approached. While Amuro had no way of knowing, the thought waves amplified by the Elmeth system's Psycommu interface had originated from Kuzco Al's subconscious fighting instincts and were being projected in all directions. They appeared inside his own cerebrum like a moving black shadow, creating a powerful force, a wall of sensation. What is it? A chill suddenly ran down his spine. At the same time, Kuzco Al yelled, "What's going on?" Commander Garcia Dowell of the Flanagan Agency had once confidently told her, "The Earth Federation putting new types to real use? It's an utter fantasy. Don't worry about it." Ensign Lala Sun's Elmeth? That was just a prototype. It was pure coincidence the enemy attacked when the system hadn't been perfected yet, when she was in the middle of a test flight. She was killed in the line of duty, but it was an accident. It was amazing, she realized, how different reality appeared to combatants on the front lines and theoreticians in the rear. Survival required an utterly different mentality from that of the desk jockeys. On the battlefield, nothing was constant. She had closed in on the Gundam enough to make out its form clearly, but to her horror, before she could get a good look, a force screamed through her mind. It wasn't light, it wasn't an audible voice, and it wasn't the force from a nearby explosion. But when it hit, it felt as though the skin and the hair on her head were being ripped off by a gale-force wind. It seemed like a hallucination, but it felt real. It was real, and it enabled her to avoid the next threat. She saw a light from the direction of the force, and made her Elmeth soar upward just as several beams nearly zapped her from below. She willed her 7 remaining bit units to attack the Gundam mobile suit, and at the same time aligned the sights of her Elmeth's twin megaparticle cannons. And then she saw Char streak by her in his red Rick Dom. Just in the nick of time, she thought. Char, too, began firing his bazooka at the Gundam, and a light from an explosion even greater than that of a Fife missile overwhelmed her main monitor. She wondered if it was all over. Was that Amuro? She thought, feeling suddenly detached. If it was, well, that was that. It's too bad, but it was your fault. You were shy and cute, but you treated me like dirt. If you were really the Gundam pilot, the slate's wiped clean now. There's something nice about that idea. We might have been together, but it just wasn't in the cards. But the battle was not over. Another powerful force roared through Kuzco's mind. She opened her mouth wide and screamed. "Kuzco, retreat!" She heard a voice loud and clear in the middle of the roar. It was her commander, Sharaznable. Retreat. Without thinking twice, she put the Elmeth into reverse so suddenly that despite triple shock absorbers in the cockpit, the G-force slammed her body toward the instrument panel in front of her. But she was well trained and never once took her eyes off her main screen. Is that really the Gundam? Her eyes widened. She could clearly see the enemy mobile suit, illuminated by the light of an explosion, charging straight toward her, its gold-colored eyes flashing, glaring menacingly right at her, through her main monitor, through the sun visor on her normal suit. In a simple twist of logic, her fear was cancelled by rage. The mysterious pressure in her mind earlier had been like a shock wave, a form of mental rape that altered her thought patterns and rattled her psyche. And if such an unwanted, unpleasant sensation happened to have come from the Gundam, well, she was not about to forgive anyone. She turned the Elmeth's twin megaparticle cannons on the charging suit and fired, but to her astonishment, it skillfully dodged her attack with body English. Her chestnut hair practically stood on end as she screamed, "It's a two-way street, Gundam. You tried to kill me. Now it's my turn. I'll turn you into dust." Inside the Gundam, cold sweat beaded on Amuro-Rei's brow and soaked his underwear. If he was going to be killed, he wished it could be under better conditions. The Elmeth quickly filled his field of vision, and each time it fired its cannons, he was surrounded by light from heat-emitting particles. That it was an oddly beautiful sight bothered him. It was absurd to feel beauty in something so deadly. He had no idea how he managed to avoid the beam blasts. He just knew that to escape from the force trying to envelope him, the force being projected at him from the Elmeth pilot through the Psychomu interface, he had to close in on the Elmeth itself. It was a realization that spurred him on, for with it, and a little faith in his suit, he knew he could survive the attacks. "You won't be able to use the remote units this time," he yelled inside his cockpit. He fired his beam rifle 3 times, and each time a powerful beam of light scorched through the blackness toward the Elmeth, but it leapt out of the way. He spun the Gundam fuselage, trying to keep on top of the weaving enemy machine, and in the process, its metallic green image shifted from his left monitor to the main display. He was now directly opposite it. He pulled the trigger of his rifle and fired. The Elmeth started to swoop below him, but he had anticipated the maneuver and brought up the Gundam's left leg, smashing it into the Elmeth's prow. Under normal conditions, what he had done would have appeared comical. His mobile suit was humanoid, and he had in effect kicked the enemy. But his mobile suit was also a weapon of war, to be used as he saw fit. The shock of physical contact reverberated through the Gundam cockpit, and Amuro saw the Elmeth shudder. And in the same instant, he felt a powerful force bearing down on him simultaneously from both his front and his rear. Could it be the Elmeth's remote units? Since he was attacking their mother machine, they were surely out to get him. In the force pressing on him, he could detect a single thought: kill him. Could the pilot again be a woman? Several beams stabbed toward him from behind, but he anticipated them. Putting his suit through an ear-grinding, bone-jarring maneuver, he managed to absorb the brunt of the attack directly with the shield in the Gundam's left hand. Whomp! The Gundam shook violently, and the impact nearly knocked him unconscious. He kept his eyes open but realized he hadn't been looking at his monitors or instrument panel. When he did, he saw glowing beams, and he saw an interaction among them, some sort of wave force controlling the beams. The waves created an undulating arc in space that quickly seemed to envelop the Gundam. He tried to scream but couldn't. His physical body wouldn't cooperate, and only an inaudible, breathless cry erupted from the depths of his spirit. The Vulcan cannon built into the Gundam's head belched and destroyed an incoming bit carrying a nuclear-tipped missile. Both the Gundam and the Elmeth were swept along by the blast. He cursed but kept his eyes open, and again saw the flow of waves he had noticed earlier. He knew he was up against a formidable enemy. Staring straight at the Elmeth remote units weaving toward him, he fired 3 shots from his beam rifle. With the light from the earlier nuclear blast still illuminating the area, 3 more explosions occurred in a clump. The Gundam and the Elmeth were now locked in a close-range duel that quickly became a raging inferno. In a matter of seconds, the battlefield was transformed from a conventional one, where isolated beams stabbed back and forth in the darkness, to a spectacular light show. The firepower was so awesome that to both Federation and Zeon warships in the area, it looked as though not 2 machines, but the entire mobile suit units of both forces had smashed into each other. Chelia Bull, with a direct view from the rear of the action, could only whisper in awe. The Elmeth and the Gundam. The 2 machines clashed again and again, and explosion after explosion occurred. But as with fencers in ancient times, whose supporters stood by and watched them duel to the death, none of the other suits in the area at first dared intervene. Both the Zeon pilots in their Rick Doms and the Federation pilots in their gun cannons and GMs held back, perhaps fearing their suits would be destroyed instantly if they jumped into the fray. But Kaishiden and Hayato Kobayashi knew what sort of battle Amuro was engaged in, and both had the same idea in mind: to make sure no one else interfered and thus give him time to dispose of the Elmeth. Taking the initiative, they boldly plunged ahead of the other Federation suits, Kai yelling, "Don't let the fireworks distract you. More Zeon suits are on their way, the ones with flared skirts." Hayato gingerly maneuvered his gun cannon below the battle zone while Kai took the higher position. But someone had already snuck into the area. As far as Shar Aznable was concerned, he was already too late. When a missile-bearing bit unit took a direct hit from the Gundam, he was too close to the explosion and was temporarily disoriented as a result. Damn. He swore, reminded again of the frailty of human flesh compared to machines. Kuzco Al was locked in close combat with the Gundam and appeared to be determined to destroy it at all costs, even if it meant her own destruction. Incredibly, she had even involved the remaining remote bits in the close-in fray. The blasts from the particle cannon in the Elmeth were like screams of her frenzied fury. "Kuzco, stay calm," he yelled, training the sights of his beam bazooka on the Gundam. But he could not keep his aim steady. The enemy's suit, moving with blinding speed, was locked in a weird acrobatic dance with the Elmeth and 2-bit units, firing beam blast after beam blast and giving him no room. Shar then realized that he was witnessing what he had seen once before with Lala's son, only this time the effect was even more powerful. It was as though the two combatants, their mutual wills locked in mortal combat, were exuding a force powerful enough to physically shut him out. Perhaps, he thought, it was because of the Psyche-Mu interface. Perhaps it could not only amplify human will but even project it as a type of power. He knew he had no choice. He had to act to save Kuzco, even if it resulted in the destruction of the Elmeth itself. Beams from a bit unit were already being deflected by the Gundam and striking the Elmeth. He had to get the Gundam away from her. He let the energy collect in his Rickdom's beam bazooka. The Elmeth crossed in space above his trajectory. Then the Gundam. Then the two of them crisscrossed vertically at blinding speed. He fired and saw an explosion. He blinked, wondering if he had scored a direct hit. But then he saw the Gundam's smashed shield and watched the enemy suit slide back behind the Elmeth. With a yell, he fired a second, then a third blast. The powerful verniers in his Rickdom helped him twist and turn in space, and for a moment it looked as though the three machines, the Gundam, the Elmeth, and his own Rickdom, would smash into each other. The next moment Shar swore at his carelessness. The Gundam's left arm, which normally held a shield, reached over its shoulder toward its backpack beam saber hilt and swooped forward. In an instant a saber blade formed and connected directly with his Rickdom's left leg. For half a second the Rickdom and the Gundam were physically joined, but then the saber sliced into the leg like a sword into flesh and bone, particles from the beam exploding in light. Shar groaned, his lips curling in an unvoiced curse. He lowered his beam bazooka and fired blindly at the Gundam, but it had already begun to move out of his line of fire toward the rear of the Elmeth. Reluctantly, he eased off on his trigger finger and then heard a whump, as an explosion thrust, and to his dismay saw that an explosion had occurred in the damaged portion of his Rickdom's leg. He had no choice but to disengage. To his surprise, he also heard a strange ringing in his cars. He glanced at his main monitor and saw the light from another explosion fill the screen. "Kuzco," he yelled. He knew that the ringing in his cars was no ordinary ring, that Kuzco had entered a state beyond his control, and that there was nothing more he could do. The ringing was also from the Gundam. There would be no retreat. Feverishly to remove the Rickdoms smashed. Kuzco Al's thoughts had already been infiltrated by Amuro's. Her hatred and rage had escalated to the point where she was doing far more than merely controlling the Elmeth's twin mega-particle cannons and bit units. Nearly half her energy was radiating out into the vastness of open space like ripples spreading on the surface of a pond. But the accuracy of the three weapons she now controlled was increasing rather than decreasing, and they were all trained on the Gundam. Amuro had to depend on the Gundam's new magnetic coating to help him evade the attacks, but the Gundam was still a mechanical system, a machine, and he knew there was a limit to its endurance. It simply was not capable of keeping up with the speed of human reflexes, and he knew the same was true of the Elmeth and its remote units. He projected an idea deep into Cusco Al's expanding wave of thought. If you want to stay alive, retreat. Amuro's thought jolted Cusco with far more force than he would ever realize. She felt something bordering on physical pain deep in her head, and such an intense chill ran through her that she felt as though her brain matter would explode through her nose and eyes. The Saikamu, which normally amplified and projected her thoughts, was now working in reverse, receiving and amplifying Amuro's. His beam saber sliced through the last surviving bit unit and the light from the in her normal suit. Her smooth skin was covered in sweat, and she was trembling with fear, but to Amuro she seemed to be laughing at him. "You're finished, Cusco." He sighted the Gundam's beam rifle on the front of the Elmeth, but then, to his shock, the same thing that had once happened in his confrontation with Lala's son occurred again. With what felt like a physical force, he was jolted by a thought wave from Char Aznable, trying to defend Cusco. "No, she's not finished, Gundam. Char, don't try to stop me. If you do, I'll have to kill you too, just as your sister asked. Greater than Artesia?" "Get lost, Char. Cusco's gone too far, and I've got a score to settle with her." Cusco Al had not laughed. She had merely lost control of her bladder and bowels and vomited against the sun visor of her helmet. Yet there was something she realized, that she could give herself to Amuro completely, unconditionally. It was both a powerful thought radiating out from her and a premonition of her own destruction. The enemy energy pulsing from Amuro had ripped her psychic sense of balance to shreds and left in its place an intense awareness of him as an individual. "So it was you, wasn't it, Amuro?" Thinking of him gave her a second of peace that transcended her earlier moments of sheer hatred. To rush madly forward with the Elmeth and die in battle with the Gundam began to seem absurd. It would be preferable somehow to take the passive route and let Amuro destroy her instantly with his beam rifle. "Goodbye, Amuro. Greater than." The same instant, a torrent of thought waves poured out of Amuro, and the muzzle of the Gundam's beam rifle exploded in flame. The same instant Cusco Al saw the flash and confronted her own death, Amuro saw a mysterious light flow from her. It appeared to be silver in color, and then he could hear her singing something about London, London of all things. "London Bridge IS, London Bridge IS. London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. London Bridge is falling down, my fair lady, my fair lady." He heard a woman's voice overlaid on that of an infant. A beautiful woman. A fair lady? Could it be Cusco's mother? Then he heard an aria and a violin being played. Was it her father? The hand of a strong but gentle man touched the strings of the violin, saying, "Cusco, honey, that's not the way to do it. You're a half tone off. You've got to push down harder with your pinky." Her fingers ran up and down the neck of the violin, and box air on a G-string formed a gentle curve and disappeared, wavering into the silver light. "Build it up with wood and clay, wood and clay, wood and clay, build it up with wood and clay, my fair lady. My fair lady, my fair lady." Then Amuro saw Cusco's pale fingers holding a pen and writing in a diary. He saw the letters she formed. They were distorted, and they too disappeared into the silver light, but he felt as if he had glimpsed her innermost forbidden secrets. "No, no, stop!" Cusco Al's gray pupils widened with terror and horror, and a young man's voice cried out, "I love you, Cusco! I love you. You've got, believe me." "No, no, stay away from me, you filthy pig." "London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. London Bridge is falling down, my fair lady, my fair lady." "Stop, stop." It was almost a scream. And what Cusco Al saw, Amuro saw too. A laughing man, apparently a Federation soldier, plunged a bayonet into the belly of her beautiful mother. Her father lay bludgeoned to death in a pool of blood. "You swine." As Cusco's screams spread out into the silver band of light and disappeared, Amuro again saw through her eyes, saw the face of the same Federation soldier. Grinning, a cigarette clenched between his tar-stained teeth. Build it up with wood and clay, wood and clay. Wood and clay, build it up with wood and clay, my fair lady. My fair lady. My fair lady. It was then that Amuro finally realized the enormity of what he had done. He had committed the unpardonable sin of killing someone he would normally have never dreamed of hurting. He had lost control to the war, the technology of machines, the whole situation, but it was no excuse. Cusco Al had been incinerated. It was too late. He wept and choked out the words, Cusco, my fair lady. After the Elmeth exploded in a giant ball of light, the Zeon and Federation mobile suit units finally closed in on each other in full combat, and the Federation ships Pegasus. Cyprus and Graydon began dueling with Zeon's Gattle fighter bombers. It was an equal match in terms of firepower. The Madagascar was an attack battleship, and it and the Gattle squadron were not about to fall easy prey to anyone. Lieutenant Commander McVeary and his 6 surviving Tomahawk fighters, for their part, braved the raging barrages and made a lightning strike on the enemy. And then he heard Char Aznable saying, "Is it true, Amuro?" Amuro was incredulous. Federation and Zeon mobile suit pilots were battling to the death, yet still were capable of talking to each other. Even in the midst of his duel to the death with Cusco Al, he had had verbal communication with her, and had allowed a personal grudge to violate his belief that combat should always be depersonalized. His comment about Char's sister had also been private, not the sort of thing one normally tossed at an enemy in the heat of combat, and he had no way of knowing how much his words had affected Char. "It's not possible to lie on this level, Char. If you don't believe me, ask your sister." He had no way of knowing if Char had received his thought, but the Rickdom's remaining leg rose up and turned. Amuro fired his rifle. The blast went wild, and he aimed again, and then it happened. His beam rifle exploded in a flash of light. Damn, he thought. Another, different Rick was coming at him, floating upward out of the darkness from below and to his right. Realizing it was trying to cut off his rear, he again put his suit into retreat. Lieutenant Commander McVeary and 3 more of his Tomahawks never returned from their heroic mission. Nor did Ensign Sarkis McGovern and his GM. The Graydon was destroyed, as were 4 of the Bull machines. Back on the Pegasus to Secca, Bright Noah looked up at the ship's screens at the expanse of the Corregidor Shoals unfolding before him. "We took quite a beating," he muttered. "But sir," Sayla commented behind him, "at least we destroyed the Elmeth and 3 of the enemy's skirted suits, and we annihilated the Gattle squadron and inflicted heavy damage on their warship." "She's right, Skipper," Mirai added, turning around while still manning the helm. "It was 50-50. I'd say it was a draw, and we held our own." "And we collected quite a bit of data on Zeon's new Elmeth machine, sir," Mark commented, seated on the boom crane chair above Bright. "Don't you think," he continued, looking down at Hayato, "that for all intents and purposes we've wiped out half their new type unit? If Zeon has 2 or 3 more units like that one, the entire Federation's in big trouble. We wouldn't have been able to stop the Elmeth attack this time if it hadn't been for Amuro." "I see your point," Bright said softly as he gazed at his crew. When Amuro finally spoke, it was with bitterness. "No, that was Zeon's only new type unit." Bright looked at him and frowned. "It's time for some rest, pilot," he ordered. "You'd better ask the medic for a tranquilizer." "Yes, sir," Amuro saluted. Then he turned around and asked Sayla for the battle report. She walked over to him and handed him a large file. None of the other pilots were interested in it yet. To be alive, to have survived, and in groups of 2s and 3s they started filing out of the bridge area toward their quarters. Amuro, still holding the unopened file, watched his friends leave, and then turned toward Sayla. "You knew the Red Comet was out there, didn't you?" he said. "I knew," she said. "I could see him. I told him what you asked. I think he understood." Without warning, Sayla slapped Amuro across the cheek. The Pegasus to Second and the Cypress rested briefly outside Corregidor. In a few hours, the code words for the final attack on Abawa Ku, play the Cembalo, would be signaled to the entire Federation armada. This is the conclusion of Escalation, the second volume of the Gundam Mobile Suit series. Watch for the final volume, Confrontation, coming from Del Rey Books in February 1991.